Before we dive into these deeply disturbing confessions that shattered families forever, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories you're about to hear, the secrets that destroyed entire families, the lies that can never be taken back, these are the kind of truths that most people will never admit out loud. And if you want to hear more real stories that expose the darkest corners of human nature, you need to be subscribed. Also, smash that like button. Let me know you're ready for this, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the people closest to you. Let's begin. There are confessions that haunt you, admissions so raw, so devastating, that once spoken, they can never be unheard. The kind of truths that don't just damage relationships, they obliterate them completely. They turn families into strangers. They transform love into something unrecognizable. And today, you're going to hear several of them. These are real confessions from real people, posted anonymously on Reddit, shared by individuals who carried unbearable weight for years, sometimes decades. And when they finally spoke their truth, everything fell apart. The first confession comes from a man I'll call David. And his story begins with something that might sound familiar to some of you: depression, isolation, a marriage that had become a prison. But where it ends, well, that's where things get truly devastating. David starts his confession with a single sentence that encapsulates everything. Quote, "I cheated on my wife of 10 years. I left her and our 2 children for someone I met online in an MMO." End quote. Pause. Now, you might be thinking you already know this story. Online affair, broken marriage, tale as old as the internet. But David's confession goes so much deeper than that, because this wasn't just about cheating. This was about a man who was drowning, and instead of learning to swim, he abandoned the people depending on him. David's journey began in the U.S. Army. During his service, he suffered a severe injury: 2 broken vertebrae, serious nerve damage, the kind of damage that ends careers, that changes lives forever. He was discharged, and then, like so many veterans before him, he fell into a dark place. 2 years of drinking, 2 years of depression so thick he could barely see through it. No money, no job, just existing day after day in a fog of alcohol and despair. That's when he met a group of alternative lifestyle people, modern hippies, Wiccans, people who seemed free in a way David had forgotten was possible. Among them was a woman who, at first, absolutely hated him. She couldn't stand David, told him he was too polite, too nice, always had something nasty to say. But as months passed, as David started to pull himself out of his nosedive, as he got a job and his own place, something shifted. He and this woman became friends, then more than friends. It wasn't love, not at first. David is very clear about that. It was just sex, just companionship, just 2 people filling a void. But then his job fell through again. No money, nowhere to go. The woman asked him to move in. He did. He helped her pay off her place with his VA loan. She was grateful. Then one night, David came home to find her crying. After a long conversation, she confessed she was in love with him. And David, this man who by his own admission wasn't emotionally self-aware, didn't know what to say. So he said what seemed easiest. He said he loved her too. They got married, had a child together. David genuinely came to love her son from a previous relationship as his own. For a while, things were actually okay. Not perfect, financially stressed, but okay. But then 2008 hit. The recession destroyed David's business. They lost everything: the house, one of the cars. They had nowhere to go. David's family took them in, and they moved into a converted garage in Texas. No car anymore. Their vehicle broke down, and they sold it for parts. And here's where things get truly dark. David was working for relatives, barely scraping by, when he started noticing money disappearing. Every paycheck gone on things they didn't need. Decorations, furniture they had no room for, watches, jewelry. Then the creditors started calling. David discovered he had $56,000 in debt. $56,000. His wife had been opening credit cards in his name, stealing from his business when it was still running, creating accounts, services, all in his name. Picture this for a moment. You're living in a one-bedroom apartment, barely making it week to week. You're out of work. You haven't done anything fun in years, and you're drowning in debt you didn't even know existed, created by the person who's supposed to be your partner. David was seriously depressed, started thinking this was how his life would end. So he did what many people do when reality becomes unbearable. He escaped into a video game, an MMO called Age of Conan. And that's where he met her, the woman who would change everything. They started role-playing together in the game, then talking out of character, getting to know each other. She was married too, having similar marriage problems. They had common interests, really seemed to connect. Started talking for 3 to 4 hours at a time, even longer on weekends. Then David started having feelings, real feelings, the kind he didn't even recognize at first. He actually thought he was having small heart attacks, those fluttery, bouncy sensations in his chest. He had no idea how to process them because he'd been numb for so long. But something was changing. David started listening to music again, wanting to dance, feeling more upbeat. His wife noticed, and she hated it. They got into a massive fight. She told him his happiness made her skin crawl. Made her skin crawl. Let that sink in. Your partner's happiness disgusts you. 2 weeks of constant fighting followed. Then the woman from the game asked David to meet her in real life. He drove 3 hours to her family's ranch house. They had a private meal, walked in the woods, and David felt peace for the first time in years. All his pressures just slid off his back. Night came. They lay down on a futon together, started cuddling. And as David says, one thing led to another. The weekend was, in his words, goddamn awesome. He had never felt like that with anyone. Everything was perfect. And here's the truly disturbing part. He didn't feel any guilt, not even a trace. When he drove home, he was out of cell service range at the ranch. So when he got back in range, his phone exploded with text messages from his wife, mean, nasty messages. And at the end, she told him she'd sent his stuff to his mother's house. She was kicking him out. David's response? A shrug. He realized he didn't give a damn. But here's where it gets even messier. His wife went out, hooked up with a guy, then called to tell David about it. He didn't care. They had another huge fight. David told her he was going to be happy with her or without her. This must have triggered something because she went out 2 more nights in a row, hooked up with 2 separate guys, admitted it willingly. Now, David was officially done. He saved money working terrible jobs for a month. Then he moved 400 miles away to be with the woman from the game. She left her husband for him. They lived in a 1-room apartment. Not a 1-bedroom, 1 room total. Living room, bedroom, kitchen all mashed together. The bathroom was basically a closet, and David says it was the happiest time of his life. never knew what happiness even meant until then. 3 years later, they were married. Another child on the way. Amicable divorce from the ex. David saw his kids regularly. They owned a home. He had a tech job, 2 cars, and he'd never been more happy. So what's the moral of this story according to David? You have to do what's right for you in this life. We only get one ride, and spending it in misery just for the sake of it isn't how one should live. But here's what David doesn't talk about: the 2 children he left behind, the example he set, the message he sent that when things get hard, when you're unhappy, you just leave. You find someone who makes you feel good, and you abandon the people who need you. Pause. Is happiness worth any price? Is personal fulfillment more important than commitment? Than the promises we make? David found his answer, but his children, the ones who watched their father walk away, they're living with the consequences of his choice every single day. And if you think that story was disturbing, I need you to stick around, because the next confession involves a mother's failure to protect her child and the guilt that's haunted her for over 2 decades. But before we continue, if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like button, because these stories need to be heard, and your engagement helps make sure they reach the people who need to understand that actions have permanent consequences. The second confession comes from a woman I'll call Margaret. And unlike David, who found happiness after his betrayal, Margaret has found only regret. Soul-crushing, life-destroying regret. Margaret begins her confession with words that immediately tell you this won't end well. Quote, "I have never spoken about this to anyone ever. For the first time in 2 decades, I'm facing life-changing decisions I made back when my younger daughter, let's call her Janie, almost died." End quote. 2 decades of silence, 2 decades of carrying this weight. And the decision she made? The one that haunts her every single day. She chose her husband over her daughter's safety. Here's what happened. Margaret was a young mother with 2 daughters, Janie and Molly. Her husband, I'll call him Matt, was by all accounts a decent father. Caring, present, or so Margaret thought. But there was something Margaret didn't know, something Matt hid from her. He had a temper, a dangerous one. One day, when Janie was still very young, she wouldn't stop crying. Matt was watching her while Margaret was out. The crying persisted. It grated on Matt, annoyed him, frustrated him, until finally he snapped. Matt shook Janie, hard enough to cause serious injury, hard enough that when Margaret came home, something was clearly wrong. Janie wasn't moving right, wasn't responding normally. Margaret rushed her to the hospital. The doctors told Margaret that Janie had been shaken, that she had bleeding in her brain, that she could have died. They asked Margaret directly, "Did someone shake your baby?" Margaret confronted Matt. At first, he denied it, completely, vehemently, but eventually, under pressure, he admitted the truth. Yes, he had shaken Janie. Yes, he had hurt their daughter. But he was sorry, so sorry. He didn't mean to. He just lost control for a moment. Margaret was faced with an impossible choice. Or at least that's what she told herself. She could leave Matt, raise 2 daughters alone, face financial hardship, face the judgment of family and friends, face uncertainty, or she could stay, give her daughters a father, give them a stable home, and trust that Matt would never do it again. The doctors told Margaret that Janie would be fine. that children are resilient, that she would recover. So Margaret made her choice. She stayed. She took Matt back, and she never spoke of it again. For years, everything seemed okay. Janie grew up. Molly grew up. They were a family. Matt never hurt them again, at least not physically. Margaret convinced herself she'd made the right choice, that her daughters were better off with a father, even a flawed one, than without. But here's what Margaret didn't see. Here's what she couldn't have known, or maybe what she chose not to see. Janie remembered, not consciously perhaps, but somewhere deep inside, some part of Janie knew she wasn't safe, that she had been hurt, that her father had hurt her, and that her mother had chosen him anyway. As Janie got older, problems started appearing. She was always extremely independent, Margaret says. But it was more than that. Janie kept people at arm's length, especially her parents, especially her father. There was always this invisible wall between them. Then, when Janie was a teenager, everything came to a head. Margaret doesn't give all the details in her confession, but she reveals that Janie eventually learned the truth. Somehow, the story came out. Maybe Margaret told her. Maybe Molly did. Maybe Janie pieced it together herself from fragments of overheard conversations and unexplained tensions. When Janie learned that her father had shaken her as a baby, that he had caused bleeding in her brain, that he could have killed her, and that her mother knew and stayed anyway, she was devastated, destroyed, betrayed in a way that can never be repaired. Margaret tried to explain. She told Janie that she forgave Matt, that she wanted Janie to try to forgive him too, that family was important, that they needed to move forward together. But Matt couldn't even look Janie in the eye. When Janie confronted him, when she demanded answers, he couldn't face her. Janie called him a coward, and then she cut them both off, completely. Janie, who had always been independent, took it to a new level. She found full-time work. Margaret doesn't know where. Janie changed her cell phone number, sold the car her parents had given her, and sent them back the money. That detail breaks Margaret's heart, even in the retelling. Janie wanted nothing from them, nothing that would tie her to them. Janie changed banks, took herself off their health insurance. Margaret hates to think what Janie's paying for her medications now, without insurance. Janie refused to tell them her new address. The only connection left is through Molly. Janie still talks to her sister. And it's very painful for Molly, Margaret says, to have to keep her sister's secrets all these years. Margaret doesn't blame Janie for being angry. In fact, Margaret says she's more angry at herself than Janie is angry at them. She's gone back to church for the first time since childhood. She prays every day that Janie will call, just once, just to talk. These days, Margaret tortures herself by looking through Janie's baby pictures. Years ago, she thought her biggest regret was giving up her master's degree to raise her family. Now, her biggest regret is failing to protect her baby girl, her lovely, beautiful Janie. In an edit to her post, Margaret tries to explain her choice. She says she reunited with Matt not for her benefit, but because she believed it would be better for both daughters to have a father. That other than hurting Janie, Matt was a kind father. That she had no way of knowing Janie would suffer more later on. But here's the truth Margaret still can't fully face. She made a choice. She chose to believe the doctors who said Janie would be fine. She chose to believe Matt when he said he was sorry. She chose to prioritize keeping her family together over holding Matt accountable. She chose to never speak of it again, to bury it, to pretend it never happened. And Janie, who suffered the actual violence, who carried the actual trauma, who lived with the actual consequences, never got a choice at all. Pause. Now Janie is gone. Not dead, but gone from Margaret's life just as completely. And Margaret is left with nothing but photographs and prayers and the crushing knowledge that she failed the one test that mattered most: protecting her child. Some betrayals can never be forgiven. Some wounds can never heal. And some choices, once made, can never be unmade. Margaret's confession ends with those words, quote, "I regret everything every day," end quote. Before we move to the next confession, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice? Have you ever chosen wrong and had to live with the consequences? Or have you been on the receiving end of someone else's terrible decision? Let me know. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment. They're warnings, reminders that our choices ripple outward in ways we can't always predict. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next confession is about lies. Elaborate, compassionate lies told at a stranger's funeral, and the devastating truth that emerged afterward. The third confession comes from someone I'll call Sam. And Sam's story is unusual because it doesn't involve violence or betrayal in the traditional sense. Instead, it involves a lonely death, a well-meaning lie, and the unintended consequences that followed. Sam volunteers at a nursing home, not for money, not for credit, just because Sam believes it's the right thing to do. Sam visits elderly residents who don't have family, who don't get visitors, who spend their final years in profound isolation. Sam plays board games with them, listens to their stories, provides comfort in their last days. One of these residents was a woman Sam will call Mrs. Patterson. She was in her late 80s. No visitors, no calls, no cards. As far as Sam could tell, Mrs. Patterson had outlived everyone who had ever cared about her. But she was kind, thoughtful. She'd talk about the past, about her late husband, about a son who was in the military. But she never went into much detail. And over time, Sam noticed her memory was fading. Details would change, stories would shift. Then one day, Mrs. Patterson passed away, peacefully, in her sleep. The nursing home arranged a small funeral service at a local church. Sam attended, as did a few other volunteers and staff members. It was a sparse gathering, maybe a dozen people total. No family, no friends, just people who knew Mrs. Patterson from the home. The pastor gave a brief generic eulogy, talked about God's love and eternal rest, the usual platitudes. Then he asked if anyone wanted to share memories. Silence. No one spoke. No one had memories to share. They barely knew her. Just as the pastor was about to conclude the service, the church doors opened. A young man in military dress uniform walked in. He looked to be in his 30s. He apologized for being late, explained that he'd been in Canada for work when the nursing home finally tracked him down to tell him about his mother's death. His mother, Mrs. Patterson's son, the one she'd mentioned, but who never visited. The young man sat down. The pastor said a closing prayer, and then, as people started to leave, the young man began asking questions. He wanted to know about his mother's final years, what she was like, whether she had friends, whether she was happy. And that's when Sam realized something terrible. The young man thought everyone there knew his mother. He kept saying things like, quote, "As most of you probably know, my mother was an avid reader," end quote. Or quote, "As she may have mentioned, our family dynamic was never the same after Pop died," end quote. He thought these were his mother's friends, but they weren't. They were just volunteers and staff, people who'd been assigned to her care, people who showed up to her funeral out of duty or pity. The pastor was faced with an awful task. He had to tell this grieving son that his mother had died without any friends, that no one there really knew her, that he was late to a funeral attended only by strangers who felt obligated to be there. But before the pastor could find the words, one of the women announced that refreshments were available in the lobby. Everyone rushed out. They didn't want to be the ones to tell the son the truth. They didn't want to face his grief, his questions, his need for connection to a mother he'd clearly loved but hadn't seen in years. The son tried to stop people, asked them questions, but they were too quick. They grabbed a cookie and left, and Sam watched this unfold and couldn't bear it. So Sam did something Sam still regrets to this day. Sam walked over to the young man and lied. Quote, "I'm so sorry," end quote, Sam said. Quote, "Your mother's loss hit me very hard. I have to say I wasn't sure you'd come," end quote. The words were out before Sam could stop them, and the young man's face lit up. He asked Sam to sit down, said he had so many questions, was just so glad his mother had had someone in her life. Sam quickly clarified that they weren't terribly close, but the son didn't care. He was desperate for any information, any connection, and so Sam started lying, making up details, being vague but memorable, saying things that could apply to anyone but sounded personal. The son launched into his whole life story, explained that he was adopted, that his mother treated him the same as her biological son who had been killed in war, that the loss destroyed his mother and father, that his father died of a heart attack shortly after, that there had been terrible family dynamics, with his mother blaming his father for encouraging their biological son to enlist, that he and his mother had a falling out when he decided to enlist too, to honor his brother. He felt horrible for not trying harder to mend fences, and Sam, seeing this man's pain, kept lying, told him his mother loved him, missed him, was so proud of him, told everyone she knew about him. Quote, "Really?" End quote. The son asked, crying now. Quote, "She missed me? She talked about me?" End quote. Quote, "Of course she did," end quote, Sam said. Quote, "She was so proud of you. She'd tell everyone you were out protecting the country, that you were an officer. But it was hard on her too. Every time there was news of an army death, she'd stop everything and be glued to the TV, praying it wasn't you." End quote. The son was sobbing at this point. Asked general questions about what his mother was like in her final years, what she did during the day. Sam stuck to vague but plausible details. She played board games, watched the news. The son asked if she was still conservative. Sam said she was still deciding since the Republican Party had changed so much. Made up favorite foods, favorite songs. Said she loved Ariana Grande until she saw how promiscuously the singer dressed. Said she loved the therapy dogs that visited. The son thanked Sam profusely. They talked about what to do with the body. Everything he said was logistically easy for him. He was thinking about cremation, keeping an urn, being able to talk to her without driving to a cemetery. And Sam, still lying, said that's definitely what she would have wanted. The son seemed to hesitate, like something wasn't quite adding up. But he nodded, and then he left. And Sam was left sitting in that empty church, having just fabricated an entire relationship, having created false memories for a grieving man, having given him a version of his mother that may or may not have been real. And here's the devastating part. Sam doesn't know if those lies were kindness or cruelty. Doesn't know if the son felt better or worse afterward. Doesn't know if creating false closure is better than facing the truth that his mother died alone, that he was estranged from her for reasons that apparently ran very deep, that he will never know what she really thought or felt about him in the end. Pause. What Sam does know is this: the son never came back, never tried to contact Sam again, and Sam is left with the knowledge that somewhere out there, a man is mourning a version of his mother that Sam invented. He's finding comfort in lies. He's forgiving himself based on false information. His entire grieving process is built on a foundation of well-meaning deception. Is that better than the truth? Is a comforting lie more merciful than a hard reality? Sam still doesn't know, and neither do I. But what I do know is this: families break apart in many ways. Through violence, through betrayal, through absence, and sometimes, like in this case, through silence and distance, and the inexorable passage of time until it's too late to ever make things right. We're going to take a brief moment here. If you're still watching, you're clearly invested in these stories, these real, raw, devastating confessions. So do me a favor, hit that like button if you haven't already. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this content reach more people. Also, subscribe, turn on notifications, because I post content like this regularly, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let's move to our 4th confession. And this one involves obsession, deception, and a stalker hiding in plain sight. This is the story of Elm. The 4th confession comes from someone I'll call Alex. And Alex's story is one of the most disturbing on this list because it involves a year-long campaign of harassment, manipulation, and psychological terror, all orchestrated by someone who pretended to be a friend. Alex's story begins in 2018. Alex had a friends with benefits relationship with a guy named Judah. It was casual, nothing serious. They enjoyed each other's company, had fun together, but there was no deep emotional connection. Over time, the relationship fizzled out naturally. They went from hooking up to just being friendly acquaintances who occasionally liked each other's social media posts. Then, one day, Judah reached out asking for writing advice. Alex wanted to be helpful, so Alex wrote several paragraphs of genuine, constructive feedback. Judah thanked Alex, and after that, they basically stopped interacting altogether. Shortly after this exchange, Alex started receiving anonymous messages on Tumblr. The first few were generic insults, attacks on Alex's appearance, their art. Alex shrugged them off. Trolls are common on the internet, no big deal. But the messages continued, and they started getting disturbingly specific. The harasser implied they knew where Alex lived, mentioned what school Alex attended, information that wasn't readily available on Alex's blog. At this point, Alex realized this wasn't a random troll. This was someone who knew Alex in real life. Given the timing, right after the writing advice exchange, Alex started suspecting Judah. Maybe he'd been offended by the feedback. Maybe he was jealous that they weren't talking anymore. It seemed like the only explanation. So Alex blocked Judah on all social media platforms and tried to move on. But the messages didn't stop. They got worse, more frequent, more disturbing. They started mocking Alex's disabilities, threatening physical violence. There was a recurring theme about disability making Alex useless and undesirable. Strangely, Christianity kept being invoked, with claims that Alex's illnesses were God's punishment. Alex turned off anonymous messaging, so the harasser created fake accounts, started messaging from those. Alex would block them and new ones would appear. It was relentless. For months, this continued. Alex started to dread seeing the notification icon, started to feel genuinely unsafe. Then, in the midst of this harassment, something unexpected happened. Alex received a message from someone new, someone who introduced themselves as Elm. Elm seemed friendly, enthusiastic, interested in the same things as Alex. They started chatting, and despite everything going on with the anonymous harasser, Alex found Elm's presence comforting, a bright spot in an otherwise dark situation. Elm and Alex started hanging out in person. They'd meet up, talk about their shared interests. Elm seemed genuinely kind, supportive. They even lent Alex an ankle brace when Alex mentioned needing one. The friendship grew. Alex felt lucky to have found such a caring friend during such a difficult time. But then, one day, Elm sent Alex a message, quote, "I can't be friends with you anymore," end quote. No explanation, no warning, just a sudden, cold severance of their friendship. Alex was confused and hurt, but then, that same day, Alex received a message from Judah. He wanted to talk, needed to clear the air about something. Alex was hesitant, given the suspicions about the harassment, but decided to hear him out. Judah immediately claimed he knew nothing about the anonymous messages, but then he mentioned something that caught Alex's attention. He said his partner had sent a hateful message to Alex after learning about their past relationship. His partner had been jealous. Alex asked who his partner was. Judah said it was Elm. Pause. Everything clicked into place in that moment. Elm, the friend who had seemed so supportive, so kind, so genuinely caring. Elm was Judah's partner. Elm had met Alex without ever letting on about the connection to Judah. Elm had befriended Alex under false pretenses. And just that day, Elm had said they couldn't be friends anymore. Alex's mind was reeling. Alex told Judah about the friendship with Elm, how they'd met, how they'd hung out, even mentioned giving Elm the ankle brace. Judah went pale, said Elm never told him about hanging out with Alex, said Elm claimed the brace came from work. That's when everything became clear, all of it. The entire year of harassment, the anonymous messages, the threats, the stalking. It had all been Elm. Elm had hated Alex violently without ever having met them. Why? Because Alex had once had a casual relationship with Judah. That was enough for Elm to construct an elaborate, year-long campaign of psychological torture. Elm had used deceit to earn Alex's trust, had gotten close enough to be invited into Alex's home, had actively harassed Alex for 5 months before even revealing their identity. And those lies continued for 3 more months after that. Elm had even lied about not being knowledgeable about astrology, a detail that would have connected them to some of the anonymous messages that referenced astrological themes. Days after this revelation, the hateful messages stopped. completely, suddenly, confirming Elm's guilt beyond any doubt. Judah reached out to tell Alex that he and Elm had separated, and that was the last Alex heard from either of them. But Alex is left with disturbing questions. What would have happened if their last hangout hadn't been cut short? What were Elm's true intentions? Was it all just online harassment, bark with no bite? Or was Elm building towards something worse? What kind of deep troubles was Elm hiding under that excitable facade? Alex sometimes wonders. But mostly, Alex is just grateful to have escaped, because someone who could sustain that level of deception, that level of hatred, that level of obsession for over a year, that's not someone who's mentally stable. That's someone capable of truly frightening things. Families don't just break apart through traditional betrayals. Sometimes they fracture because of obsession, because of people who can't let go, because of individuals who construct elaborate fantasies and then act on them in ways that put others in danger. Elm destroyed their relationship with Judah through jealousy and deception. But more importantly, Elm could have destroyed Alex. And that's a truth that haunts Alex to this day. Pause. We're past the halfway point now, and if you're still here, I know these stories are affecting you. They're supposed to, because these aren't fiction. These are real people dealing with real consequences, real families shattered by real choices. So before we continue, show your support. Like this video. Comment below with your thoughts. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This is the kind of content that matters. Real stories, real truth, real warnings. The fifth confession is about a predator, someone who targeted the most vulnerable among us, and a grandchild who barely prevented a tragedy. The fifth confession comes from someone I'll call Jordan. And Jordan's story involves something many of us fear, but don't talk about enough. What happens when the people we love most become vulnerable to those who would exploit them? Jordan's grandmother was everything you'd want in a grandmother. Sweet, kind, trusting. She'd spent her whole life believing in the goodness of people, believing that if you treated others well, they'd treat you well in return. It's a beautiful way to live, until it becomes dangerous. As Jordan's grandmother aged, she started showing signs of dementia. Not severe, not at first, just small things, forgetting names, repeating stories, losing track of time. But there was one thing that remained constant: her trust in people, her willingness to believe that everyone meant well. Jordan had been caring for grandmother, checking in regularly, making sure she was safe. One day, Jordan stopped by unexpectedly, walked into the house using a key, and found a stranger sitting in grandmother's living room. A man, middle-aged, completely comfortable, like he belonged there. He was sitting on the couch, chatting with grandmother like they were old friends. Grandmother saw Jordan and smiled. Quote, "Oh, this is Cousin Danny," end quote, she said. Quote, "Remember him? He came by in his camper," end quote. Jordan's blood ran cold. They didn't have a Cousin Danny, never had. This man was a complete stranger, but grandmother's face was so happy, so trusting, so certain that this was family. Jordan's mind raced. Confronting the man directly might upset grandmother, might cause a scene. So Jordan played along, smiled, acted like everything was normal. Then Jordan told the man that grandmother needed to rest, suggested it was time for him to leave. The man hesitated, but under Jordan's steady gaze, He eventually got up and left. Jordan watched him go, made sure he actually left the property, then locked the door behind him. When Jordan checked grandmother's belongings, the truth became clear. Her purse was empty of her weekly medication organizer, all her pills gone. In the bathroom, the hook where she always hung her wedding ring was bare. The ring that had survived decades, that meant everything to her, just gone. This man, this cousin Danny, had come into grandmother's home, had won her trust with lies about being family, had stolen her medication and her most precious possession, and he'd nearly gotten away with it because grandmother's failing memory made her the perfect victim. Jordan realized in that moment that grandmother couldn't live alone anymore. If someone could get into the house that easily, trick her that completely, what would stop it from happening again? Next time, Jordan might not arrive in time. Next time, the consequences could be so much worse. So Jordan made the hardest decision of their life, moved grandmother into a nursing home. It tore Jordan apart, but it was necessary for grandmother's safety. The staff at the nursing home adored grandmother immediately. Even in her later stages of dementia, she had that magnetic sweetness that made people fall in love with her. Jordan visited often. Grandmother would light up when she saw Jordan, though sometimes she thought Jordan was her sister, or her mother, or just some kind stranger stopping by. Every now and then, grandmother would bring up cousin Danny in the camper. She'd smile about it like it was a cherished family memory, a happy visit from a beloved relative. Each time, Jordan would play along, nodding and smiling, never correcting her. It was easier that way, but every time grandmother mentioned him, Jordan felt that same chill down their spine, because the reality was they never had a cousin Danny. The man grandmother remembered so fondly wasn't a relative. He was a predator who saw an easy target in an old, trusting woman with dementia. Jordan tries not to dwell on what could have happened that day. At best, the man would have drained grandmother of money and possessions, leaving her confused and heartbroken. At worst, well, Jordan doesn't even like to finish that thought. What Jordan does know is this: if Jordan hadn't walked in when they did, they might have lost more than grandmother's ring and medicine. They might have lost grandmother entirely. And that thought is more terrifying than anything else. Pause. This confession is different from the others because it's not about a family member's betrayal. It's about the world's betrayal, about how vulnerable our loved ones can become, about how predators know exactly who to target and how to exploit them, and about how sometimes protecting the people we love means making painful decisions they might not understand. Jordan's family didn't break apart from internal betrayal, but it fractured nonetheless. Grandmother had to leave her home, had to go to a place where she'd be safe but would never truly feel at home, had to be watched and monitored because trust, the very quality that made her so lovely, had become her greatest vulnerability. And somewhere out there, cousin Danny is probably still doing this, still finding elderly people with failing memories, still earning their trust with false familiarity, still stealing from them while they smile and offer him tea, believing he's family. Before we get to our final confessions, I want to remind you one more time. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like, drop a comment. Tell me which of these stories affected you most, because your engagement doesn't just help the algorithm, It tells me these stories matter to you. That truth, no matter how dark, is worth sharing. The sixth confession involves something we don't talk about enough. Toxic relationships that don't just damage, they destroy, and the violence that can erupt when someone refuses to let go. The sixth confession comes from someone I'll call Chris, and Chris's story is about obsession, manipulation, and a relationship that never actually existed except in one person's mind. Chris met Dominic at university. They lived in the same dorm, became friends. Dominic was a bit intense, a bit odd, but seemed harmless enough. They'd hang out, play video games, talk about classes, normal friend stuff. But then Chris started dating someone, a woman named Anna. And that's when everything changed. Dominic's reaction was immediate and extreme. He called Chris constantly during the first date, over and over. Chris ignored the calls, focused on Anna, had a great time. When Chris got home, Dominic was waiting outside the dorm. Quote, "How was your date? Do you like her?" End quote, he asked, sounding miserable. Chris said yes, he liked Anna, wanted to see her again. Dominic looked devastated. Then he dropped a bomb. He'd heard Anna was a massive slut who slept around, that Chris should stay away from her, that she'd break Chris's heart. Chris asked how Dominic could possibly know this. Anna and Dominic had no mutual connections. Dominic just said he'd done his research. Chris was angry, told Dominic it was none of his business, that he'd find out for himself about Anna. Dominic teared up, said he was just worried about Chris. Then he stormed off, clearly expecting Chris to follow. Chris didn't. Went to his room instead, angry that Dominic would try to interfere like this. But it got worse. Dominic sent Chris screenshots on Facebook of an alleged conversation with Anna. Messages where Anna supposedly boasted about using Chris, about planning to break his heart. But the screenshots didn't make sense. Why would Anna message a stranger about her plans? Why would she tell a friend of Chris's something so incriminating? Chris demanded to see the actual conversation on Dominic's computer. Dominic claimed he'd deleted it because it was too upsetting. Chris knew then that Dominic was lying, making up evidence, trying to sabotage Chris's relationship with Anna through deliberate deception. Chris told Dominic he wasn't interested in him, would never be interested, and that Dominic needed to stop immediately. Dominic responded that Chris was being a terrible friend, that all he was trying to do was look out for Chris, that he couldn't believe Chris was believing a stranger over him. This pissed Chris off even more. He blocked Dominic on social media, so Dominic started texting, calling non-stop, every single day, telling Chris he was so depressed over this, that he'd start taking heroin, that he was contemplating suicide, basically trying to manipulate Chris through guilt and manufactured crisis. The texts continued. Dominic kept saying he knew Anna was cheating on Chris, that Chris needed to come to his senses. It got so bad that Chris went to stay with his parents. Didn't feel comfortable living in the same area as Dominic anymore. Had to block Dominic's number because the calls were constant. But Dominic didn't stop. He started spreading lies at the university. Told people that he and Chris had been in a romantic, sexual relationship, that Chris had cheated on him with Anna, that Anna was disease-ridden and terrible. Most people eventually believed Chris's side of the story, but Dominic was very manipulative, good at making himself sound legitimate. Chris eventually moved back to his dorm. It was inconvenient to stay at his parents', too far from classes. The night he returned, he got back late, hoping to avoid Dominic. He was lying on his bed trying to figure out what to do about this situation when suddenly a brick came flying through his window. Glass everywhere. Chris rolled off the bed, hid, heart pounding, waited for something else to happen. Nothing did. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. It was Dominic. Quote, "I just saw Anna throw a brick through your window and run." End quote. Dominic said, quote, "I told you she was bad news. You should have listened to me." End quote. Chris exploded, screamed that he knew it was Dominic who threw the brick, that he was calling the police right now. Dominic tried to protest, but Chris hung up and immediately called the authorities. When police arrived, Dominic wasn't in his room, but when they searched it, they found a large stash of illegal drugs. Dominic was arrested. The charges stuck this time, and Chris was finally free. But here's the thing. Dominic genuinely believed he was in a relationship with Chris, genuinely believed they were together, that Chris had betrayed him, that he had a right to interfere, to manipulate, to control. He'd constructed an entire fantasy in his mind and then acted on it as if it were real. That's the truly terrifying part. Not that Dominic was malicious in a calculated way, but that he was completely detached from reality, living in a delusion where he and Chris were together, where Anna was the villain, where his stalking and harassment were justified acts of love and protection. How do you protect yourself from someone like that? Someone who doesn't respond to boundaries, to rejection, to direct confrontation? Someone whose entire worldview is built on a foundation that doesn't exist? Chris's story is a reminder that families aren't the only structures that break apart. Friendships do too, and sometimes what you think is a friendship is actually something much darker, something obsessive and possessive and dangerous. Pause. We've reached our final confession, and this one circles back to where we started. Betrayal within a marriage. But unlike David's story, this one doesn't end with happiness. This one ends with permanent, irreversible loss. Our seventh and final confession comes from someone I'll call Robert. And Robert's story is similar to David's in many ways, but the ending is very, very different. Robert was also in a troubled marriage. Financial stress, constant fighting, a wife who seemed to find fault with everything he did. Like David, Robert found escape in an online game. Like David, Robert met someone there who made him feel understood, valued, happy in a way he hadn't felt in years. And like David, Robert had an affair, met this woman in person, felt that same rush of connection and peace, believed he'd found real love, maybe for the first time. But here's where Robert's story diverges. Robert's wife found out about the affair before he could make a clean exit. She confronted him, and in the argument that followed, things got physical. Not in the way you might think. Robert's wife didn't hit him. Robert hit her. He claims it was an accident. That, in the heat of the moment, gesturing wildly during the argument, his hand connected with her face. But the result was the same. She had a bruise. Evidence. Proof. His wife called the police. Robert was arrested, charged with domestic violence. The woman from the online game, the one Robert thought he'd build a new life with, disappeared. Wanted nothing to do with someone facing criminal charges. Didn't want that kind of drama in her life. Robert lost everything. His wife filed for divorce and got full custody of their children. Robert got supervised visitation only. His job found out about the arrest and let him go. He moved back in with his parents at 43 years old, facing court dates and legal fees he couldn't afford. The affair that was supposed to save him from his miserable life instead destroyed what little stability he had left, and the woman he'd believed was his soulmate revealed herself to be someone who bails the moment things get difficult. Robert is left with nothing but regrets. He regrets the affair, regrets the argument, regrets ever raising his hand even accidentally, regrets not finding a healthier way to deal with his unhappiness, regrets modeling such terrible behavior for his children, who now barely speak to him. Unlike David, who found happiness after his betrayal, Robert found only consequences. Because here's the truth they don't tell you. Sometimes, when you blow up your life for a chance at happiness, you don't get the happiness. You just get the destruction. Some people cheat and end up in loving relationships that last. Like David. Some people cheat and lose everything, like Robert. The difference often comes down to factors beyond our control. How the other person reacts, whether violence enters the equation, whether children are involved, whether the new relationship can survive the transition from fantasy to reality. But both stories share one critical element: children who have to live with the consequences of their parents' choices. Children who learn that when things get hard, you run. You find someone new. You prioritize your happiness over your commitments, your promises, your family. And those children grow up to be adults who struggle with trust, who struggle with commitment, who carry the scars of their parents' betrayals into every relationship they have. Pause. So what's the moral of all these confessions? What's the lesson we're supposed to take away? Maybe it's that our choices matter, that what we do in moments of weakness, in moments of desperation, in moments of selfishness, those choices ripple outward in ways we can't predict or control. Maybe it's that families are fragile, that trust, once broken, can rarely be fully repaired, that some wounds never heal no matter how much time passes. Maybe it's that we need to be honest with ourselves about our motivations. David convinced himself he was choosing happiness. Margaret convinced herself she was choosing stability for her daughters. Sam convinced themselves they were being kind. Robert convinced himself he deserved better. But in the end, they were all just choosing what felt easiest in the moment, what required the least courage, the least discomfort, the least accountability. Real courage would have been David working on his marriage or leaving before starting an affair. Real courage would have been Margaret leaving Matt the moment he hurt Janie. Real courage would have been Sam telling the son the truth. Real courage would have been Robert getting therapy, getting help, finding healthy ways to address his unhappiness. But courage is hard. Honesty is hard. Taking responsibility is hard. So instead, we make easier choices. We lie. We cheat. We betray. We rationalize. And we tell ourselves stories about why what we did was necessary, was justified, was even good. And then years later, we write anonymous confessions on Reddit, trying to unburden ourselves, trying to find forgiveness or understanding or just someone who will listen without judgment. But the confessions don't undo the damage. They don't bring Janie back to Margaret. They don't give the son honest closure about his mother. They don't protect future victims from predators like Cousin Danny. They don't help David's children trust their future partners. They don't erase Robert's arrest record or repair his relationship with his kids. The confessions are just words, released into the void, offering temporary relief to the confessor, but nothing to the people who suffered the consequences of their choices. So if you take one thing away from these stories, let it be this: your actions have consequences, not just for you, for everyone around you, for your children, for your partners, for strangers whose lives intersect with yours in ways you might not even realize. Choose carefully. Choose honestly. Choose with courage instead of convenience. Because one day, you might find yourself writing your own confession, trying to explain the unexplainable, trying to justify the unjustifiable, trying to live with the knowledge that you broke something that can never be fixed. Before we end, I need you to do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Second, hit that like button. Let me know these stories resonated with you. Third, drop a comment. Tell me your thoughts. Have you experienced betrayal like this? Have you been the one who betrayed? Are there confessions you're carrying that you've never shared? This is a community built on truth. Raw, uncomfortable, necessary truth. And your voice matters here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, the families that break apart in these stories, they're real. The pain is real. The consequences are real. So choose wisely. Choose with empathy. Choose with the understanding that your choices will echo long after you're gone. Until next time, stay honest, stay conscious, and never underestimate the weight of the secrets you carry.